My name is Melanie and welcome to Furniture Recreated. This is a very old piece. It came to me from a client that was commissioning me to refinish it. She wanted it refinished back to its natural color. First things first, you got to clean it off. I use vinegar and water, 1 part vinegar to 1 part water. Simple, 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 and it does the job. The kinds of problems you run into with an antique piece are things like this. The screws won't come out. They're just difficult. They're old, they're stripped, they're flat. I'm sure I've said this before, but patience, you have got to have patience if you're going to work on furniture, especially antiques. What you're looking at here is the top, and you can see it's a mess. And you can see that leathery texture is the finish. And I knew right then I was going to have to strip. But before I do any of that, I needed to do some repairs. Some of the drawers were broken, loose. They just needed to be put back together and glued. And then I could move on to the refinishing part. But you really need to do this kind of stuff first before you do anything else. Get it out of the way. I prefer to use citrus strip for stripping. Yes, it probably takes a couple of applications, but it's a lot less toxic than some of the others that work a little bit better. But it still does a job and it's safer. I still wear a respirator and gloves. You always need to wear gloves. You don't want to get that stuff on your skin. This is probably a good time to tell you that I am an affiliate with Amazon, and if you click on any of the information in my description box that's connected to Amazon, I will get credit for that. An important part in the stripping process is the mineral spirits that you apply at the end to neutralize the chemicals in the stripper, and it stops the process of stripping the finish. If you don't do this part, you will not be able to put any kind of finish over the top because it'll just eat away at that finish too. I'm using steel wool here because there were some gummy parts of the finish that wouldn't come off, so I really had to scrape at that. I'm using 120 on the doors. The inside of the doors were not covered with polyurethane or shellac or whatever it is they used, so I was able to sand it pretty easily. Once that finish is off of there, I can go back with my 220 grit, which really smooths it out even more. And then after that, I take my 400 grit and hand sand to make it super smooth. The other side of the doors I had to strip. Now you may not have noticed this little piece. It was on the top on the back, and it was just a little accent piece. Couldn't forget that. This was the most difficult area for me to strip. I think I stripped it twice, and then the little tiny areas that were a little bit more intricately carved, I did that at least 3 times. And it was a lot. It was a lot to scrape. It was a lot to sand. After this week of refinishing this antique, my hands were raw from the sandpaper. After stripping this drawer, I thought it was dry, but you can see from this sandpaper that All of that gunk is from the moisture that's coming out and gumming up my sandpaper. So I had to stop, otherwise I'm going to scratch that surface and let it dry. And I think I let it dry a couple of days before I did any more sanding. So I went around to all the parts that I didn't have to strip and sanded those. One thing you learn when you're stripping furniture, especially something like this, is time management. Because you're going to have to stop one thing and start another and go back, because there's a lot of waiting involved when you're stripping and letting things dry. So it does take time, but you get better at it the longer you do it. I did a lot of testing in areas that I knew were going to take a while to strip. So sometimes I would strip areas that I knew were ready and then go back and cover it all up again, put more stripper on those more difficult areas. Ooh, it took time and lots of different tools. Steel wool being one of the best ones, because once I got to the part where the mineral spirits, I was using steel wool to get into all of those crevices and get out all of the gunk. And you got to do it before it dries, because then you've got a nightmare on your hands. Now that I've finished stripping the columns, I'm going to have to let them dry for quite a while. So I go to other sections that need to be sanded and stripped. I like Green Envy mineral spirits. It is lower odor. I wouldn't say it's odorless. And it's also more environmentally friendly. Not only do I use mineral spirits to clean off the stripper, I also use it to raise the grain on the wood before I apply any types of stain. Raising the grain allows the stain to absorb into the wood a little bit more evenly. And it also allows you a sneak peek at what it's going to look like when it's all finished, which also gives you a chance to go back and maybe sand off some areas that you didn't quite see until you put the mineral spirits on. So in those cases, you want to make sure that you let it dry before you go back and sand any of those areas. These are the pieces that are difficult to sand, and I should have been using a vise here because, as you will see in just a second, whoops, I'm really lucky that I didn't really cut my knee. You can't really see there, but yeah, that hurt, and I've got a scar now. I probably say this in every video, but finishing the drawers means finishing all around the outside and the inside, because the drawers are the utilitarian part of your piece and they get used a lot. You don't want to put anything in a drawer that looks gross or feels gross. This happens a lot, especially on an antique piece, because a lot of times when it's really, really old, it gets put into a garage or a basement where there's water. This is water damage right here. Kind of has a greenish, brownish tint. You know it when you see it. And the thing about water damage is there's no way to repair it. It's soaked into the wood. It's still solid, but it's discolored and that won't change. So there's a couple of things you can do. You could try and stain it really dark and you may be able to cover up that discoloration, but it's not a guarantee. Or you could paint them. And in this case, I would probably paint these black because it's a dark piece, it's an old piece. I have to contact my client and see what she says. I had a comment on my last video asking me what this tool is. It's an all-purpose tool. It gets into little tiny areas. This one is called a cat or a mouse. I don't know why. I think it looks like an iron. After trying a few different ways to sand this column, I decided to try the cat, but I needed to make sure that I was shaping this column the entire time. I wanted to maintain the original shape, obviously, so I had to move it around the piece in order to get that to work. It felt to me more like sculpting than sanding. This is what destroyed my fingers, I think. Just holding on to the sandpaper and trying to get into all of these little crevices. I tried a few different techniques and tools, and well, I got the job done. I found this grip pack on Amazon by PowerTech, and it gave me a lot of different contours and angles to work with, and this helped a lot. This helped my hand a lot, my fingers, because it just gave me a little bit more of a grip, and there were a lot of different shapes in there that actually worked on those contours that I had. You can find out more information about these rubber grips in the description box below. I think part of the reason I kept switching tools too was it was just easier on my hands to kind of switch things up instead of having the same position of my fingers for hours. Once the drawers were dry enough to work on, after I used my orbital sander, I had to go back and hand sand some sections that just weren't coming off. And the mineral spirits were really handy. I could keep kind of an eye on how things were looking. Now, I did have a couple of spots. This was a veneer after all, so there were some spots that were thinner, and so what I do is I take some of the sawdust from the actual piece and I mix that with some top coat. Now, I got this idea from this old house, so you know it's good. And it helps to kind of mask that section that I sanded too far down. You'll also see I use a marker, and that is stain in a marker, and that's a nice way to touch things up as well. I think it looks pretty good. But it's not just the outside that you need to worry about. I am using Big Mama's Butter for the inside of the drawer. Look at the difference. Look at how nice that looks. I use a big fat brush to apply the butter, and then I use a soft paper towel to wipe it back. And it takes a little time to dry, but oh man, does it smell good, and it looks good. This is the stain that I use. It's neutral. Again, it doesn't have any pigment in it, but it will help to preserve the wood. Now, the same sanding I did on the drawers, I did to the top as well, because there were some spots there I still had to sand a little bit harder with some hand sanding. And then I used 400 grit to make it nice and smooth. Of course, my eye just kept going to the small areas that I just couldn't get the finish off of. So it's just some last minute sanding to get the most off that I could. But the little bits that were left, I really kind of thought were nice. They emphasized those areas, kind of made it a deeper shadow, and really it looked beautiful in the end. I did talk to my client about the legs, and she agreed to go with the black paint, so I will be doing that shortly. Even on the legs, you don't want to forget those finishing pads in order to make that surface nice and smooth. We are down to the final act. I'm putting on the polyurethane. It is an ultra flat, and I like this ultra flat because when anything is shiny, it tends to magnify any kind of imperfections in the wood, and I really didn't want to do that with an old piece like this. There were plenty of those on their own, but and really that's a beauty of an antique, but I didn't want to magnify them. So really I do like the flat finish, and really all you want to do is emphasize the grain of the wood and nothing more. And I really, oh my gosh, I am so pleased with this piece. I think it came out really nicely, and as usual, I learned so much, and I'm just grateful that my client liked it too. So really that's all that matters to me, is that I made my client happy. I do like to put at least 3 coats on, because I think that gives it a good amount of protection, and it also feels nice and it looks nice as well. And I also use a finishing pad in between each coat to really emphasize that smooth finish. My client wanted the original hardware, and all I used was steel wool to make it look like that. I was so thrilled. I really didn't think it was going to look this pretty, and wow, it's beautiful hardware. I am so happy that it turned out that way. This is something I forget to do all the time. Make sure that you shut the doors and put it in the drawers before you're all finished, because there might be a spot that shows that maybe you should have refinished. And really, this was a section that was kind of crappy, so really the only solution was to paint it. And I mean, it's not like something you really saw very much, but you could see a little bit at the bottom, so I wanted to make sure that wasn't a problem. So I painted it black, and it looked fine. I have to say my favorite part is putting in the drawers and getting the first look at the whole piece all put back together. Thanks for watching. Good luck on your next project, and I'll see you next time.
You can do it.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. You can find more videos like this one on my YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment and do that now. You're helping me out a whole lot, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Thanks.